Well, it's only fair that we start with last season's champions, Liverpool. We're joined now by Beth Lindop, who knows Liverpool better than anyone. They've obviously had an incredible summer transfer window. Beth, just in terms of a very basic, broad question, how have Liverpool prepared for the new season, and are you expecting a repeat of last season's title-winning team?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be different for Liverpool this season, because I think part of the thing that made last season so special was that they went into it with very little expectation actually on them. Obviously, Arne Slot came in. Nobody really knew what to expect. They didn't sign anyone bar Federico Chiesa, who only played a small part really in what Liverpool did last season. So I think, that enhanced, I guess, the whole mood of the season, that they were able to do that so expectedly and go on and win the league at a canter. So this season it will be different, because there is a target on their backs, particularly when you consider how much they have ended up spending in the market. I think they've had a good pre-season, to be fair. They obviously weren't involved in the Club World Cup, so they've had the players were allowed a little bit of time to rest, which a lot of these players aren't particularly used to. And then they had a tour out in the Far East, which was pretty successful. They lost to AC Milan, but they weren't too concerned about that. That was one of the first friendlies, and they've sort of improved since then. I was at Anfield the other week they had a double header against Athletic Club Bilbao, and they fielded sort of two separate teams in that, the two games back to back. And the real positives to take from both of those teams, a lot of the younger players looked really good. And the likes of Florian Wirtz, Hugo Ekitike, all did a pretty good job. However, I was also at the Community Shield on Sunday, and there was some concerns, I think, to come from that. Not necessarily in terms of the result. It is essentially a glorified friendly, and if there's a game to lose, then it's probably that one. But I think in the second half, in particular, defensively, Liverpool looked poor. Palace got the better of them on a number of occasions in that second half, and Liverpool were lucky really that they didn't lose that in normal time. Obviously it went on to penalties, but I think as well, another thing from Sunday, that the squad depth, it was clear that as much as Liverpool have spent big this summer, they've also let a number of big players go. And I think if they're not to bring in, if they weren't to bring in another few faces before the window closes, then I would be really concerned for the squad depth going forward, particularly at the back, because at the moment they've only got 3 recognised centre-backs, and one of them is Joe Gomez, who is injured at the moment, who has a pretty torrid record within. They need to go back into the market, I think, and add a few reinforcements before the window closes.
Just on the defence, I mean, obviously lots of the talk is around Isak and going back in for him and maybe making another bid to Newcastle. But do you think if they were to only get one extra player in between now and the deadline, that maybe a centre-back is more important than signing another striker, as fantastic as signing Isak would be for Liverpool?
Yeah, I think if fans could only choose between one or the other, I think most fans would probably go for a centre-back, just purely because, as I say, they've only got 3 recognised centre-backs in the squad at the moment. Joe Gomez, as much as he's a fantastic player and it is very well liked on Merseyside, you can't rely on him for a sustained period. Ibrahima Konate the same, really. He had a pretty good season in terms of injuries and staying fit last season. Missed a short spell in the middle of the campaign, but even he has had a pretty tough time with injuries during his time at Liverpool. So I think in terms of top quality cover, Liverpool have more players that can cover in forward areas than they do in defence. But that said, Liverpool last season had 6 senior forwards at their disposal, and now they only have 3. They obviously have decided to part with Luis Diaz and Darwin Núñez, and they've got in good fees for those players, which is great, and that can help offset some of the spending elsewhere. But ultimately, both of those players contributed to the title winning. Chiesa at the moment, his future is still up in the air. I mean, whether he will stick around now that they've got only a few options, I'm not sure. But yeah, obviously it feels crass to talk about him from a footballing perspective, because first and foremost, it's devastating from the human side of things that he's no longer there. But also he was a massive player for Liverpool and a valuable and a reliable source of goals. So I think they need to do both. But I think if you had to pick between one or the other, I think centre-back is probably the most important.
Well, James, can I ask you then about the expectation that Liverpool are going to face? Because obviously there wasn't really much expectation last year, and they used that to their advantage and were able to kind of go on and win the title. Obviously that's going to be completely different, as Beth mentioned, this year. The summer that they've had, the fact that they're the defending champions, people are going to expect them almost to kind of walk the Premier League, but it's not quite as easy as that.
No, it's not, and it is something, for example, that Arsenal have obviously struggled with in the last couple of years. That there is this expectation, when you spend and you build towards success, that it creates a different environment, particularly in tight games at home, where the fans they turn up expecting you to win the game, and if it's 0-0 after an hour, or it's tight, then it can get nervy. And I think, I'm not suggesting there weren't nerves at Anfield at times last season, but when there's no expectation, when the manager leaves, a new guy comes in, and it's more about it's sort of a dawning of a realization that you could win the league over the course of 9 months, not starting in August with, well, we expect to win this, and this is the standard we have to hit every week, otherwise we fail. Psychologically, it is a different challenge for them, and it is something that they're going to have to adapt to. And sort of as Beth was saying there, you've got some big characters who've left the club as well. Players who've been there and won it before. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Luis Diaz is they've won the leagues together, and you are losing some of that know-how and that maturity and that experience. And the other thing I think that changed the dynamic a little bit for Liverpool is Florian Wirtz, because obviously they've got to adapt the way that they play, with him playing as, presumably he's going to play as a 10 pretty much consistently, and how that changes the way that they attack. We sort of say, and I know I was guilty maybe of saying this earlier about Isak, and they sign him and they win the league tomorrow, or just give him the title. I mean, it feels like that, but it isn't as simple as that. That they are having to reintegrate several new players into a setup. They've obviously got 2 new fullbacks. They're going to change the way that they attack and the way that they try and win matches. And you do wonder what effect that would have on someone like Mo Salah, where, everything would go through Salah. And you feel as though it's more likely to go through Wirtz this season, or at least those two are going to share a bit more of that responsibility, that kind of creative responsibility. And just how that's going to work is a little bit of an unknown, especially when you consider that they're having to do that and adapt and learn to play with each other against that backdrop of, well, we've won the league, we expect to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with Liverpool, because I said earlier in the summer that I thought it was really impressive what Liverpool had done, because it'd be very easy for Liverpool to kind of sit there and go, well, actually, we've got a title-winning squad here. We don't actually need to do that much to it. And they started the summer really well with a couple of signings, and obviously Wirtz was done relatively quickly. But actually, they've gone further and past that. And there's a situation where if you were to get Isak and maybe Marc Guéhi from Palace, that you could be starting the season with 6 new starters, which is a massive squad churn, isn't it, for any club, let alone a team that's coming off winning a Premier League title. I mean, do you see that, as exciting as all these signings possibly would be, and obviously if they have Isak up front with Wirtz behind, I mean, that's an incredible team. But have you got any concerns about the amount of changes that Liverpool have had to make to a title-winning team, and then to go and start again and try and do it all over again? Do you think that is too many, or do you think it'll kind of be all right on the night almost?
I always remember, whenever this sort of topic comes up, I always remember Arsene Wenger talking about windows and saying, if you make more than 3 or 4 signings, you are entering into a different phase with your squad.
Yeah.
You are asking, the dynamic shifts, the way you play shifts, the chemistry has to be developed. If it's fewer than 3, then they're kind of assimilated into what already exists, especially if they're starters. Obviously, if we're talking about players who are expected to start every week. If it is 5 or 6 for Liverpool, then, and look, if they get Guéhi and they get Isak, they've had a phenomenal window and they start favourites. They probably start favourites anyway, even if they go in, with the squad they've already got. And I'm never going to sit here and say they couldn't win the league because, I would expect them to do so. However, it isn't fantasy football. It isn't as simple as, well, you go and get this lad from Bournemouth who played really well. You go and get this lad from Germany who was really good. You go and get one of the best centre forwards from Newcastle, Ekitike, this guy from Florian Wirtz that everybody wanted for 100 million quid, and bang, you've won the league. It isn't as simple as that, and it might be that actually what we sort of thought last summer was, how is this transition from Klopp to Slot going to work? That's actually the question for this year, weirdly.
Yeah.
Because he didn't really change too much. The fullbacks were a bit more conservative in the way they played. He dropped Graham Birch in to play a bit deeper to give that back four a bit more protection. And they clearly weren't as cavalier and as sort of quite as gung-ho as they were under Klopp. But it wasn't a revolution, was it? And really what we're seeing now is that question being asked a year on, but it feels strange because they've won the title and obviously he's doing it from a position of strength. So if they were to sort of fall short this season, it's, we're not talking about, is the job too big for Slot? All of that has sort of been removed from his shoulders. But there is, I think, that debate now about can he actually evolve Liverpool into his own team? I mean, I remember writing a piece at the back end of last season when they basically won the league, but they hadn't officially won it, and sort of saying, has there ever been a Premier League team that is so deserving of being champions, yet is so obviously in need of a rebuild at the same time? And that is kind of how it felt. I got a lot of stick for that, by the way, but I think what Liverpool have done in the summer does reflect that that's probably how they felt as well. That they knew that they needed to remold that squad to not mask the deficiencies, but certainly upgrade in several positions. And they've done that, and they may well do that more before the deadline. But there is still a doubt that comes with that about whether it all comes together. Because let's be honest, if it was just about spending money, then Man United would have won the league every year for the last 25 years.
Take a little dig there at the end for no reason. Yeah, I mean, in fairness to Slot, I think he's made that point. It's not, their summer has not been sort of sprinkling cherries on top of the cake. It's been about changing the ingredients almost, and when you do that, you can never be sure of what the outcome's going to be. I mean, with all the changes, I mean, it's difficult to sit here and talk about Liverpool because, it's possible that by the end of the window, they could have Isak, they could have a new centre-back, whether it's Marc Guéhi or someone else. And that does change. It obviously changes the squad more, but they're two of the, best players in the world in their position. So obviously it would change Liverpool's prospects. I mean, for me, sitting here right now, I think Liverpool are still the team to beat. I think all the other clubs, United, City, Arsenal, whoever it is, we'll be looking at Liverpool and thinking if we can finish above them, we've got a pretty good chance. Is that your opinion? Do you still see Liverpool as a kind of the favourites, the team to beat next year?
Yeah, I think so. They're champions and they've got better on paper anyway. I mean, we're judging all of these teams on paper really at the moment because they haven't played a competitive game yet. So, there are few, I mean, we're sort of talking about this in a way that we're kind of creating doubt out of the transfer business that they've done, but they have solved one or two of their key issues. And I think Kerkez he's a really good signer at left back. I think Frimpong's a really good signer at right back. Florian Wirtz is, one of the brightest talents in Europe. Ekitike similarly. So, you look at those four in particular and just think, well, a lot of Premier League clubs would have liked to have signed 1, 2, 3 or 4 of those players, and including their rivals, So I think Arsenal's strength and City look better. Chelsea, difficult to know exactly where they are at the moment after the Club World Cup. But again, they've spent significant sums in the market and you think they'll improve for another year under Maresca. So everybody's kind of clipping at their heels a little bit. But, they have to be the team to beat. They were, they were so clearly the best side last season that there is a gap there that the others have to make up. No, that's not to say that they can't do it, but they are there to be shot at this year, and deservedly so.